in this part 2 of the tips from Bruno Silva for tuning UBA, let's talk a little bit about this parameter, which is the threshold for getting offenses firing. The idea in here is that if you get a threshold that is surpassed because the amount of risk accumulated for a particular user surpasses that threshold, an offense fires that invites you to go into the UBA and look what the heck is the guy actually doing. First recommendation from Bruno is start with static, for sure, right? We'll talk a little bit about dynamic in a second. And again, this feature is it's up to you to decide whether you want to have it to only monitor imported users from a directory or other discovered users dynamically. But in here, the idea is to set up the threshold. So let's say if I put a threshold here at 200, right? How many offenses I'm going to get? Well, 47. And you get a flavor of what type of things is UBA detecting. But, you know, probably 47 is way too many offenses to get. So let's say that I go into a threshold of 350, unless everybody goes banana in your company. Well, still it's a little too high. Let's say I go to 500. I'm trying to see what is normal and what is not. Well, that's kind of a 3 guys. Well, then you may say that my top limit would be say 600. Probably that at 600 I will get 0 users. Correct. So you say, well, you know, where is it going to be my threshold based on the current amount of users? So let's say I'm going to put this at 520. Let's see, what do I get here? Maybe I get a 0 there. Well, let's say 480. So you get the point. This is going to vary on your system after the system has been gathering a little bit of data. So something within that range. Once you are good with the static threshold, then you can consider switching to dynamic. And here things work a little different. This is a standard deviation from the normal. And these things might be applicable. Let's say that you have a seasonal type of environment in which your activity picks up during Christmas time, and then the risk is going to get higher just because people do more of the same things that they do every day, and everything carries a risk. So consider doing the dynamic, and notice that if you put an amount here, typically that gets multiplied by 10 on the type of risk. But you do the same thing. So let's say that I put here, you know, 40 or 48, right? And you hit there, well, I will get 23 offenses, and you play in the same way with the number. But again, start with static and move to dynamic when appropriate. The other settings that you need to play is this decay factor. In case you haven't played with it, this is I like to call this one the rate of forgiveness. So every hour I'm going to decrease the risk factor by 50%. Then very few things are going to be risky. So you may want to actually modify this to a lower value, so say 0.25 or something like that, right? So the rate of decay is less steep, and the people will accumulate more risk, and the rate of forgiveness will be lower. These are self-explanatory. I mean, how many days do I want to keep the data, the duration of the investigation, when is my user inactive? Well, that may vary on your environment. The type of, if it's a guy that works, you know, if your environment people are, you know, cranking the keyboard all the time, maybe 15 minutes is too much, maybe not. You know, you set that up. Dormant account, again, on your policy. When I don't use an account for 14 days, it's considered normal. Is that too little, too much? You need to think about those things. Now, also keep in mind, and let's actually move into the rules. But before I even talk about the rules in UBA, which there is a very nice button here that helps you work in here, I want to mention something that changed, I believe, in 3.5, or I don't know, we are at 3.6 at the moment that we are doing this video here. But this keep in mind that in any rule that is part of the UBA, if in the description of the event that gets launched, well, this is actually not a UBA rule. Let me actually select access and authentication to get some of the UBA rules, and they start with UBA. So you click here, and if you go to the second page, if you have this thing, sense value equals whatever, every time that this rule fire is going to add to the user ID that was picked up in this particular case, is going to add 5 points of risk to his overall score with the rate of decay and all the stuff that we mentioned. In the past used to be that you need to put the sense, the high level category sense. No longer that's the case. You can put whatever high level category in here, and still and this is for rules that are not UBA. Let's say that you have a rule in Curator, nothing to do with UBA, but what you want to do is that when that thing happens, I want to contribute to the risk of that guy. Well, you do it by just putting, dispatching an event and putting in the event description sense value equal and whatever is that quantity. Now, Bruno also was very emphatic in saying that the amount of rules that you should have enabled should be very slow, especially if you are not seeing value from UBA. You should take a drastic approach and have at most 12 rules enabled to begin with, and then you keep adding rules. And how do you do that, and where do you actually start with? Well, obviously the first space to start has to do with access and authentication, the first category for that, right? And if you select the rules that have to do with, you need to, unfortunately, there's a little bit of time that you need to take, but you need to go into every one of these rules and decide several things. Well, is the risk score, you want to mess around with that? I wouldn't touch them, but understand the rule and see whether this is something that you want to have enabled or not. And one thing that you should do on every one of those rules, let's see, I think I should be able to see it here. When you click on that icon, these are the log sources type that this rule works with. You need to make sure, I mean, do, Control F and do a search. Let's say that I have Sky High. Yeah, there it is, Sky High Network. So if I have logs from Sky Network, this rule is applicable. So understand how it works and then decide to enable it or not. So start with that category of access first. Another one that Bruno likes to do very quickly is threat intelligence, because many customers, correctly so, you have threat intelligence data. Now, every one of the rules that has a reference set, well, you need to look something like this. For example, this rule, it makes sense for me to have it enabled. Why? Well, because if I click here, I see that I have a reference set that is actually being populated, and this is a stick and taxi that is putting hashes for WannaCry into my system. So I will be able, and this rule will be able to work because the data in the reference set is there. But if you see a case like this one, monitor look sources needs directory 0, well, don't enable that one, because there's no data that you will be wasting logic in going into here, and there's nothing to compare and gain. So if you have good quality threat intelligence going into any one of those reference sets, make sure that you enable those rules. But not all of them works with just that. For example, if you are interested in detecting spam, let's click on this rule and understand how it works. So you click on it and you see the logic. Well, first of all, this is from the inside out, and I don't understand why it has there remote to remote, but and when the event matches UBA common event filter, that's for this event. And then notice that it goes and is checking whether this IP is being labeled as a spamming IP from the X-Force. So that makes sense. You are interested in that, enable that rule. See the system, how it's working in the next 3, 4, 5 days, and see how this is impacting, what are the things that you are detecting. Go ahead yourself and go into and generate some spam and see what is it that the system is detecting on that. So, but go little by little. And actually in 3.6 the approach has been that only 3 rules, new accounts detected, unauthorized access, and dormant account used, are the ones that are enabled by default. So if you start a clean UBA and you start with 3.6, only those three rules will be enabled by default. It's kind of the same idea that Bruno recommends. Well, the developer has put that into the system. If you have modified, if you have edited any one of the rules and you are moving from 3.5 to 3.6, whatever you modify, they are not going to touch. So if I modify 50 rules, well, you will have 53 rules, the 3 by default, if they were not already enabled, and then the ones that you actually modify. So the migration will respect that. I passed my normal threshold, so to speak, of 10 minutes per video, so this is getting way too long. So let's start with these 2 videos from tips from Bruno, and if you want to leave us some comments, if there are other things that you want us to include, please leave me a comment, and I'll make sure I reach out on Bruno and provide additional tips. So let's start with these 2 and see what the reaction of you curator practitioners is.